House will come back to order. House will come back to order. Clerk will ring the bell. What you got? Clerk will read the caption to a group of privilege resolutions.
Honoring the life and memory of Sergeant Danny Norris in retiring badge number 902. Honoring the life and memory of Anthony DeNorris Trammell Sr. Honoring the life and memory of Mary Jane Salter. Recognizing and commending Representative Edward Mickey Stevens upon the grand occasion of his retirement. Recognizing and commending Patricia Gant. Recognizing and commending Jamal Rucker. Recognizing Albert Thomas Reeves. Recognizing Charlie Thomas Garton. Recognizing and commending Howard Chief Ellis Jr. Recognizing May 15, 2021 as Henry County Bicentennial Celebration Day. Honoring Dr. William Gay for his contributions to Black radio. Congratulating and commending Blue Ridge Adventure Wear. Recognizing and commending the Fannin County women's basketball team. Recognizing and commending Alan Bradford. Congratulating and commending Judge Sarah Doyle. Congratulating Horace King for his trailblazing Georgia Bulldogs football career and for being an outstanding Athenian. Honoring the University Cancer and Blood Center, Athens Clark County Medical Oncology Clinic for outstanding public service. Commending and congratulating Verna Mae Dabney. Honoring the life and memory of Caden Lee Musgrove. Congratulating the Georgia Southern's Clay Target team for winning the 2021 Division IV ACUI Collegiate Clay Target National Championship. Commending Mike Glenn upon the retirement from the Glader Atlanta Christian School. And for other purposes, that completes the reading of the privilege resolutions.
Is there any objection to adopting the privilege resolutions? The chair hears none, and the resolutions are adopted. Clerk will read the caption to Senate Bill 115.
Senate Bill 115 by Senator Roberts of the 29th, Albers the 56th, Harper the 7th, Payne the 54th, and Cowser the 46th. To be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 5 of Title 40 of the Official Code of Georgia Ontario relating to general provisions regarding driver's licenses so as to provide for an instructional course or presentation educating drivers and the public on best practices to implement when interacting with law enforcement officers. This bill having referred to the Committee on Motor Vehicles. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Momtahan to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. I rise today to start a conversation, to offer a solution, and to take a first step to resolve this issue of law enforcement interaction, to recognize the initial steps to a real resolution to these issues starts with a proper education in law enforcement interaction. That's right. It starts with education, as do many things in our communities and our society. It's understanding the underlying motives and facts and the things that affect us every single day. I rise today because on March 9th of 2018, at 1 a.m. in the morning, a young lady was driving home after a night out in Cobb County. She was pulled over. Now this young lady, she was panicked, as many of us who are sitting right here in this chamber. She looks around. She sees the blue lights flashing in the rearview mirror. As a man approaches her vehicle and asks her for her information, it becomes more and more evident that this was not a law enforcement officer, but instead a sexual predator and a police impersonator. This young lady was sexually assaulted, and the perpetrator left the scene in a hurry. 4 short hours later, he then went on to sexually assault another female driver, yet again impersonating a law enforcement officer. Let me tell you, I think there's been a lot of talk on what this bill does and what it doesn't do. Let me start by saying this. Senate Bill 115 on line 14 requests that the Department of Public Safety work in collaboration with our friends at the Georgia Public Safety Training Center to develop a curriculum to educate drivers on the best practices to implement when interacting with law enforcement, and to roll this curriculum into all driver education programs that already exist under the law today. It dictates that it should teach new drivers to understand what they should do if they start to be pulled over by a police officer. It would teach our young women and men to pull over in a well-lit and populated area, a nice, brightly lit gas station, where it's safe, where they can identify folks, and that if they are not certain, to call 911 to ensure that the person that's pulling them over is a real law enforcement officer and not a potential predator. It will teach our drivers common sense principles, like when you get pulled over, turn on your dome light, roll down your window, put your hands on the wheel, and lower the temperature when an officer comes up to your car. Senate Bill 115 will educate our drivers on why officers ask the question they ask. And we have to remember that these are children. These are children that don't understand how to parallel park or what a yellow line means in a roadway. They're looking for simple explanations on what they need to do. It's going to express the danger and the challenges that our friends in the law enforcement community take every single day when they interact with our communities. And will reinforce the fact that every traffic stop is different. Senate Bill 115 goes further. And I think this is the balancing point. This is what we have to remember when we educate our young people. This bill recognizes the fact that we have to develop expectations for officer conduct. That's right. That these students have to know, hey, what do you need to expect when this officer pulls up to your window and talks to you? And it's going to empower Georgians with the knowledge to protect their constitutional rights during a traffic stop. That includes the freedom of speech, searches and seizures, and self-incrimination, as well as a clear understanding of how to report unprofessional and unsafe behaviors exhibited by those law enforcement professionals. Senate Bill 115 goes forward to also help our friends in law enforcement in our counties to protect our school zones, and that was a measure that overwhelmingly passed this House earlier this year. But make no mistake, the sole purpose of Senate Bill 115 is to protect our families, our citizens, and our officers through education. To teach them what those expectations should be. As a father of 3 children and 2 daughters, I would simply ask that you pass this step forward in the right direction to put our families, our communities, and their safety first. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield the way if there's no questions.
You do have a lot of questions.
I'll take a couple, Mr. Speaker. I yield for a couple.
Chair recognizes Representative Walensky in room 341 for a question.
Thank you, Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
Is it not true that Section 2 of this bill was originally filed by me? The answer is yes.
The answer is yes, sir. That's House Bill 248, I believe.
Does the gentleman yield again?
I do.
Is it not true that every relationship is a two-way relationship, and we got to make sure that when one side is trained in communications, that both sides are trained in acting properly, and that benefits and makes it safe for everybody in Georgia?
That's right. Education is the key to this cooperation. I appreciate the question.
Do you further yield?
I'll take one more, Mr. Speaker.
Chair recognizes Chairman Knight to your right for a question.
The gentleman in the well, do you yield?
Yes, sir. I yield.
Is there anything special about the day other than Sine Die?
Well, if you have to ask, today is my birthday.
All right. Happy birthday.
Thank you, sir. With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. We've got a number of members that have signed up to speak. Chair recognizes Representative Alexander to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The death of George Floyd at the hands of police last year was a wake-up call for many Americans about the multitude of problems inherited in our modern-day policing system. But it was deja vu for Black Americans. Mr. Floyd's murder was also a reminder that past efforts to address problems with policing have failed repeatedly. It is against the backdrop of these realities, including the backdrop of the start of the trial of the police officer who murdered Mr. Floyd, that I am deeply troubled by the provisions in Senate Bill 115. If public safety is the goal, then this body must not pass Senate Bill 115. Senate Bill 115 may seem innocuous on this face, but when you really dig deep down into the bill, it is the real-world implementation. The problems with Senate Bill 115 are glaring. It creates a new instructional course designed to educate drivers on how to behave when interacting with law enforcement officers. The bill emphasizes on the behavior of drivers and the onus it places on ordinary civilians of Georgia to protect their own safety. Shifts responsibility away from where it should lie, which is with the police. Another incredibly troubling provision of this bill is the fact that the training course would be designed by and possibly given by law enforcement officers. There is a long-standing adversarial relationship between police and the communities they serve, especially communities of color. And a training course for civilians being designed and potentially administered by the very people who have contributed to the brokenness of the police system would do nothing to address the lack of trust between police and people of color. Senate Bill 115 would do nothing to fix our nation's broken system of policing. Instead, Senate Bill 115 will likely contribute to the problems in our current system of policing. One thing this bill fails to address is the importance of ensuring that drivers and civilians are aware of their rights when they are stopped by police. And yes, I did try to get that amended when I was in the committee, and it failed. The training course established in Senate Bill 115 requires civilians to learn about the rights of officers, but it does not require civilians to know their own rights in interactions with police. This is horribly one-sided, out of touch with reality, and incredibly dangerous. When civilians do not know their own rights, it is more likely that their rights will be violated, as we as a legislative body should be strongly against such a thing. Instead, us as a legislative body should support measures that ensure civilians are fully abreast of their rights, especially when they are interacting with police. One of the most important rights of civilians when they are interacting with police to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. The Fourth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is supposed to protect civilians from these encroachments, but law enforcement officers frequently disregard the protection of others. For example, once an individual exercises their right to remain silent, officers will often ignore this and continue peppering them with questions. Officers will conduct searches of cars in violation of people's rights. Eventually, evidence procured this way might be thrown out in court, but the damage to the civilian, or at the outset, the victim of police overreach remains. The expectation should not be that civilians take courses on the rights of police officers. It should be exactly the opposite, because when civilians do not know their rights, they cannot protect themselves. They cannot easily advocate for themselves, and thus, it is more likely that their rights will be violated. Finally, a diverse coalition of over 35 social justice organizations have all voiced their opposition to Senate Bill 115 because of the very reasons I have stated, and I urge this body to heed the concerns of these organizations. These organizations are subject matter experts on police-civilian interactions, and the best practices for ensuring these interactions do not result in harm done to either the police officer or the civilian. We must fully take into account the concerns of these organizations over the individuals who may stand to benefit financially from the passage of this bill that creates an additional training course for drivers. Along with these organizations, I urge you all to vote no to Senate Bill 115 as currently written, because the government should always be in favor of teaching people their rights and ensuring that those rights are protected. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well and ask that you vote no on this bill.
Chair recognizes Representative Erica Thomas to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Police need accountability, not absolution. We know that the policing system in this country is absolutely broken. And this bill is coming up on the week that Derrick Chauvin, the man who killed George Floyd after putting his knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, starts his trial this week. How is this going to help fix the distrust that divides and exists between communities of color and law enforcement? SB 115 provides instruction for drivers on the best practices for interacting with police. Essentially suggests that someone like Rayshard Brooks was responsible for his own death, not the officer who chased him down and murdered him. This bill fails to inform Georgians of their rights under the Georgia law and the U.S. Constitution when interacting with police. Rather than empower these drivers, this bill simply seeks to absolve law enforcement of their own responsibility. Recently, a Clayton County Sheriff deputy pinned down and beat Roderick Walker, a black man, after a routine traffic stop. This bill makes it seem like the treatment of Roderick received was somehow warranted. Dictating solutions and assigning blame to motorists is not a productive way to engage with our communities that have been on the receiving end of state-sponsored violence for generations. Senate Bill 115 ignores the root of this dangerous law enforcement and civilian interactions. This legislation wrongly places an onus on the civilians to protect themselves from harm when interacting with law enforcement. This legislation wrongly suggests that police violence against the people of color, especially black men, result primarily from bad behavior on the part of the detained and murdered. Instead, the focus should be on addressing racial profiling. I'm going to say that again. The focus should be on addressing racial profiling, the use of excessive force, and other systemic issues that poison the interactions between law enforcement and the civilians. This is an unproductive way to connect with our communities that have a strained relationship with the police. It's dictating rather than finding common solutions to the public safety concerns, especially from communities of color. And today, I urge you to stand against this type of rhetoric and vote no on SB 115. I yield the well.
The chair recognizes Representative Nguyen to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think all of us in this body, either as a child or as a parent, know that families are tasked with having the talk at some point in our lives. That talk, the birds and the bees, probably looks a little bit different for all of us. Maybe it's about consent or emotional readiness. Maybe it's about abstinence or disease and pregnancy prevention. But whatever it is, it's a pretty normal part of American family life. But there's another talk that not all of us have to give or hear. That other talk is reserved for Black and brown families, and especially for Black and brown families who have little boys who will soon be teenagers. My friends have shared with me the pain and grief they feel when they have to give that talk. Because what parent wants to tell their child, don't wear a hoodie, don't put your hands inside your pocket, don't run and put your hands up. And still, that might not save you. The reality is, even if citizens do all the right things, it doesn't guarantee that their lives won't be unjustly taken by the hands of law enforcement, especially if you are a Black American. Police violence is the leading cause of death for Black men. And if you are a Black boy or man between the ages of 15 and 34, you are 10 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement than anyone else. But if you are not Black or brown, you can walk into a Black church in Charleston, South Carolina, and kill 9 church members and be taken to Burger King on the way to jail. You can target 3 Asian businesses and kill 8 people, and law enforcement will say, he had a bad day. You can storm the U.S. Capitol with zip ties and Confederate flags, and law enforcement will take your hand and help you walk down the steps of the Capitol. But if you are Black and brown, you can be a 26-year-old emergency room tech sleeping in your bed when law enforcement botches a raid, shoots and kills you in your sleep, and you are still blamed like Breonna Taylor. You can be a 12-year-old boy playing outside in the sandbox with a toy gun when you are shot in the torso and killed by law enforcement like Tamir Rice. You can be a 20-year-old, 120-pound Asian boy holding a pen and shot in the back 3 times by law enforcement. You can be a sitting state representative and knock on the door of the governor's office and get dragged away by law enforcement officers. Instead of passing legislation that requires more training on de-escalation, cultural competency, accountability, and transparency for law enforcement, we are passing legislation that puts the onus on the individual for staying alive. And this legislation does not include the basic fundamental rights of citizens, especially when it comes to search and seizure. This bill sends the wrong message. It perpetuates the myth that civilians are the ones responsible for the way that law enforcement treats them, and it does nothing to address the long-standing distrust between law enforcement and communities of color. Right now, the world is watching the trial of Derrick Chauvin, the law enforcement officer who put his knee on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. And during those 9 minutes and 29 seconds, George Floyd begged for his life 27 times. Please, I can't breathe, help. He cries out for his mom 27 times. And yesterday, a 9-year-old little girl had to take the stand, and she testified about the officer. The ambulance had to push him off. They asked him nicely to get off him, and he still stayed on him. He was already dead. There's a saying that we use when we go to protest. Hands up, don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot. Those are the pleas of Black and brown Americans across this country. And SB 115 doesn't address any of that. We live in two Americas. And that is why I'm voting no against this bill. And I do ask you all, we need to seriously reflect on this. Because if you have children and you don't have to give them the talk, you think about telling your 10-year-old little boy, next year when you look like a man, you might get shot and killed for going on a run. That is wrong. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. We have a minority report under the rules of the House. 20 minutes for the minority report and then 20 minutes for the chairman's time. Chair recognizes Representative Derrick Jackson to speak to the minority report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand here strongly opposing Senate Bill 115. You heard the presenter of the bill. He said, quote, teach common sense, unquote. Teach common sense. Let me just share a few minutes, Mr. Speaker, about common sense. I come from a family, nothing but uniforms, military, law enforcement, firefighters. In my family, we did not need someone out of our household to teach us common sense, what to do when you encounter authority. No one. In fact, no Georgian right now is asking for Senate Bill 115. No one is asking us, this body, to teach them common sense, especially especially when this body continue to use words simply as a bumper sticker for those who say they are patriotic. Spare me, because you watch January 6th, the assault on this country that I serve, and you said nothing. So let me just share 3 words with you today: honor, courage, and commitment. It takes honor, ladies and gentlemen, to do what's right, regardless if it's day or night. Honor. Honor. To make sure that when you see wrong, it is still wrong. It is still wrong. You cannot take a lie and make it the truth. Courage. Always to do the right thing, even when your constituent's not looking. Then commitment. Commitment. Who are you committed to? Who are you committed to? You're definitely not committed to the Word of God that we preach each and every day when we're in this body. To pass a bill that you can't even be a good Samaritan. You're going to charge me in a felony if I give a homeless person within 150 feet of a precinct? I cannot be a good neighbor. So we're going to talk about common sense? We have rules. We have guidelines. For those who say they are about the Constitution, you attack the Constitution every time we pass something that's unconstitutional. Every time. How are you going to pass a bill that goes against protesters? It is their constitution to peacefully assemble. So Senate Bill 115 is talking about teaching citizens about the expectation when they encounter law enforcement. But your demonstration, your behavior is contrary. Contrary. I've watched, and I appreciate the speaker who put me in the gallery, because I've watched this body, this machinery, how you twist arms, of your own party, how you talk about taking the rights of a constitutional officer, taking their rights because they did not do your will, to do the wrong, perpetuated by a lie. You talk about cheating and fraud where there's no evidence. It didn't even stand in the court. Republican and Democrat federal judges kicked it out of court. No evidence. Zero. You come before this well in this body and talk about how you talk about patriotism and the Constitution, and you treat it like a bumper sticker. I say to all, strongly oppose Senate Bill 115, honor, courage, and commitment. Honor, courage, and commitment. Because one day you all will have to answer your actions on this earth. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
Chair recognizes Representative Kennard to speak to the minority report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in opposition to SB 115. I draw a lot of inspiration, as I'm sure you do, from our 16th President, Abraham Lincoln. One of the things I really admire about President Lincoln is his ability to evolve his thinking and his positions over time. It wasn't until late in his presidency that he actually arrived to the position of being an abolitionist and abolishing slavery. Earlier in his presidency and in his life, he was actually very comfortable with keeping the institution of slavery in the South to preserve the Union. But he started listening. He started being influenced by other voices, other abolitionist voices, namely Frederick Douglass. And over many conversations and with time, he actually convinced President Lincoln that abolishment of chattel slavery was the route that this country needed to take. And then Abraham Lincoln, of course, passed the 13th Amendment, which did end chattel slavery in our country. I too have evolved my thinking across the course of my life. At one time, I used to balk at the idea of white privilege. I didn't think it was a thing. I completely dismissed it. I was like, come on, man, this is America, the land of equal opportunity. And if anyone had enough gumption, grit, self-determination, wanted to do the right thing and work hard enough, you could do anything that you wanted to be in this country, because this is America. Of course, I conceded that there had been some dark days in our national past with slavery, Jim Crow, and the disenfranchisement based on gender, ethnicity, etc. But I also believed that those days were well into our rearview mirror. We had fought a civil war. We had the ruling of Brown versus the Board of Education. We had passed the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. We had marched on Washington. We had passed civil rights legislation. We brought women to the table with women's suffrage. We passed the American with Disabilities Act. We elected a black president. And now it's all fixed. We are all on equal footing. And after all, everybody has a struggle. Everybody's had challenges. Even Gregg Kennard has felt the sting of discrimination, being raised in an affluent area, but my family did not have a lot of means, and I was raised every day of my childhood in a trailer park. But I fought and clawed my way out of the trailer park with self-determination, and if I did it, anyone can do it. This is America. White privilege is a farce. I look back at that time and my thinking then with embarrassment, shame at my ignorance, my arrogance. I was deep within my own bubble. I actually have many bubbles. Being white is just the first layer of privilege that I possess. Being white, that's currency. But being white and male, that's double the currency. And then when you add to that being heterosexual, being Christian in this Bible Belt culture, being able-bodied, I am swimming in privilege. I can navigate my life very easy with no obstruction because of my identities. But as advantaged as a person born like me is, there are certainly liabilities, largely blindness. Privilege creates significant blind spots as to the experiences of others. As the dominant group, there's really no reason to look beyond your own personal experience. And life is fine for me, and you assume, and privilege assumes, that life is just fine for everybody else. Now, to my credit, as ignorant and as visually impaired as I was, I did begin to listen better. I began to read books on this subject. I did a lot of reading, a lot of listening, not just books that reinforced my own personal paradigm, my own bubble. And after a period of listening, more listening, I began to eventually break out of my bubbles. A greater empathy began to emerge with my heart, and I took steps attempting to walk in somebody else's shoes and look through others' lenses. I began to recognize that everyone does not share my lived experience. Bill Bullard says, opinion is really the lowest form of human knowledge. It requires no accountability, no understanding. The highest form of knowledge is empathy, for it requires us to suspend our egos and live in another's world. It requires profound purpose larger than the self-kind of understanding. One of the conversations I began to have that expanded my understanding to other experiences was around the conversation of law enforcement, how people engage with the police. For someone like me, for someone like my parents, my grandparents, my wife, my children, all police engagement has been friendly and positive, and our take is the police are the good guys. They're our friends. They are here to serve and protect. Whenever I've seen blue lights flash in my rear view mirror, I've never had any anxiety about that. I just said, oh shoot, how fast was I going? Or maybe I had a tag expired, or maybe there was a brake light, but there's never been a sense of worry. And when the police pull me over, I just simply roll down my window and say, officer, how fast was I going? And I always get a smile. And the worst thing that could ever happen to me is to get a violation, a ticket. But most of the time what happens to me is I get a smile and a friendly, Mr. Kennard, just slow down, be on your way, get your tag updated, and we go from there. But other conversations I began to have with friends of color shed light on a much different experience, a different dynamic with law enforcement. And this has been confirmed hundreds of times now. I've talked to many people of color about their experience. And it began to hit me that people of color have a very different story to tell. And then this story hit me personally when 3 years ago, my daughter married an African-American man, and we became close friends with his family. They've been married 3 years, and my son-in-law is a straight arrow. He's straight, flies right, follows the law as a rule, was a model student. My daughter and Chris met in high school, and he was a model student, a model citizen. He went to the U.S. Coast Guard Academy, and now he's an executive officer protecting our coasts. But to hear them talk about the talk that has been mentioned today was just a very foreign experience to me, where there's a lot of worry, a lot of anxiety, especially when a young male of color is pulled over. Now, when Chris has his uniform on, he's reasonably safe, but when he puts on civilian clothes and is behind the wheel, there's a whole different phenomenon, a potentially lethal phenomenon called driving while black. SB 115 lacks empathy. It lacks empathy. This is legislation created inside the identity bubble. If you look at all the sponsors and co-sponsors, they're all white, heterosexual, Christian, able-bodied men. When this bill came to motor vehicles, the committee on which I sit, members of color and community advocates of color tried to talk to the group about the different perspectives, tried to make amendments to be inclusive of other citizen experiences. But they were shut down. Their voices were shut down. They were actually met with condescension. They were met with snarky comments, and that smacked of privilege. And I recognize that because I used to be there. I do believe that resources should be poured into training to improve better police engagement with citizens. But such training resources should be directed towards the paid professionals, law enforcement, training on community and race relations, mental health, de-escalation. SB 115 puts the onus on citizens, training citizens to interact with the police. This is a deflection and a misplacement of responsibility. Now, I've been asked before, Greg, you seem to have some animus against white people and an axe to grind against the white community. Do you even like white people, Greg? And I want to set the record straight today. I love white people. My wife is white. My children are white. I love me some white people. But what I don't like is unchecked white privilege and white superiority, the kind that is exclusive and doesn't include other voices and other perspectives. I think in our deliberations and in our decision making, we have to be more open to other voices. SB 115 is one-dimensional, and I'm asking you to vote along with me and vote no. One last thing, there's a spiritual teacher that's important to many of us in this room who said, you can't put new wine into an old wineskin because it will burst. It's too inflexible, it's too brittle. You have to put new wine into a new wineskin, which is soft, flexible, and has the ability to expand. Going forward, I think Georgia needs legislators that operate from a new wineskin. We're going to be better served with new wineskins, new ideas, new paradigms. Mr. Speaker, I yield the will.
Chair recognizes Chairman Corbett for the chairman's time, 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members of the House. You know, I rarely come to this well, but today I rise in support of Senate Bill 115. You know, we passed this bill out of the Motor Vehicles Committee last week. When I called this meeting, you know, and some of the members had other meetings to go to, I said, come on, we should be finished. It shouldn't take long. Well, I was wrong. What's a good common sense piece of legislation got turned into a political issue, a political football. I've gotten emails, you know, telling me how this SB 115 discriminates against people of color. You know, I sure hope that the primary author of this bill, who we just mentioned earlier, you know, his wife and kid doesn't find out about this because they are people of color. The author of this bill, you know, it was brought up. They wanted an amendment put on this bill in committee. You know, it got voted down. They wanted to teach the Constitution, but it was mentioned in committee. If they want to bring a bill, if somebody wants to bring a bill to teach the Constitution, better yet, a better idea. Let's make Georgia a Constitution state where we protect all the Constitution. I'm sure we could get a lot of support for that. You know, I was in the 3rd grade, you know, when our school integrated. You know, every day at recess, the white kids and black kids, we would fight at recess. Didn't know why, but we would fight. But, you know, after a few weeks, you know, we became friends. And one of my best friends all the way through school we graduated with, Eddie Richardson. Matter of fact, we've had him here as Doctor of the Day. My best friend when we graduated high school. He was one of the ones we used to fight with every day. You know, we quit concentrating on what divided us or what our difference. We started looking at what we had in common, stuff that united us, and we become best friends. We had a preacher here earlier this year. I think Representative Meeks up in the gallery. I think it was his pastor. You know, his sermon basically said, you know, if you get up every morning looking for something that offends you, guess what? You're going to find it. You will find something that offends you if you get up looking for that. But if you get up looking for stuff that you have in common, look for the good in people, guess what? You're going to find that too. You know, we got to start concentrating, look for what unites us, and quit looking for stuff to make a political issue about. You know, I urge you for favorable consideration for this bill, and I'll yield the rest of my time to Chairman Powell and Representative Momtahan. Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman Alan Powell for the chairman's time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen of the House. And I've sat back and I've listened to this, and you know, I went to the motor vehicles meeting last week, and I was never as shocked and surprised as I was. I'm pretty well used to, after 30-something years of going to committee meetings, and I've seen certain issues that you could justify when it became hot-button issues. But, you know, I sat there in the meeting and I went there to amend that bill to put this piece on school safety. That's the second part of this bill on here. But, you know, as we got into the meeting, this turned into a full-blown debate over race and over a lot of other issues. And I understand that these are some very tedious times, to say the very least, in where we're living at today. You know, a lot of the cases that have been made and all of this, you know, and I truly can't understand some, but I understand other things when it comes to the process of this House and the legislative process. You need to pick your fights on things. And if there's not a fight in a bill, then don't make something into a bill that doesn't need it. In this bill that you're looking at, the core of this bill, this says that the Department of Training, of Public Safety Training down at Gypstick, that they would develop a plan and a program of teaching young adults under the driver training programs in this state certain criteria that could help these young people as they're developing themselves to know how to react if they're stopped. And if you look at the language in here, I mean, it's wide open that it could be anything. They can talk about what law enforcement does when they stop somebody, but they could also teach the young adults how to react, which also would include their rights. It could also include their rights, and I have no doubt that's exactly what it will be done when they develop this plan. You know, at the committee meeting, we kept hearing about, we demand that they talk about constitutional rights. Well, constitutional rights is something that I think everybody knows today. You know, unfortunately, in a lot of cases that some things don't go as well as could be prepared, and I understand, and I've said this for years, that law enforcement is a mixed bag a lot of times because of the stress and the strain and the concern that they're under for their lives and for their safety. And I don't always agree that certain law enforcement, some law enforcement do things that are questionable, and generally in this day and time they'll pay the price for that if that's so. But I heard a dialogue, and the dialogue that I've heard up here has been a rehashing of several subject matters this year. I heard an impassioned speech by one of our members that was a baiting type of a speech, but I understand that. I understand politics, folks. But I gave a talk from this well a couple of weeks ago of something that I felt very concerned about, and that's about where we are as a state and as a nation and where we're going. And these things are being cured, and people know what their constitutional rights are. But they also need to understand that as a young driver, when they get a driver's license, what to expect if they're pulled over. And if you look at the language in this, it goes into a lot of things about, you know, it goes into issues such as, you know, continuous citations, habitual violations, understanding an officer's discretion. You know, I remember once upon a time in this nation that when officers stopped you, you automatically had your driver's license in your hand. That was what all of us in my age group was taught. Plus, hopefully, you could ask them if they'd give you a warning instead of a citation. But then over the period of years, as the safety of officers became more and more questionable, then that criteria and a lot of times got out of hand. But one of the things that they do in law enforcement training today is they train dispute resolution. They try to train these officers about how to do things the right and the wrong way. And these are the things that we're moving to. But ladies and gentlemen of the well, and I know that I'm not changing the first vote out there, but this bill is not the vehicle to use to talk about your issues unless you're going to continue to make every issue in the legislature something that needs to be drug into this effect. You know, we saw a bill last week, and, you know, I said up front that on the issue of the working on the election system, and I said it. In 2018, the buzzword was suppression. In 2020, it was fraud. So if that didn't tell you anything, there was a problem that we needed to revamp the election system and to fix it so that no matter what county you were from, whether you were from Fulton or Hart or DeKalb or Franklin, no matter where you are, was that the system was the same no matter where you go. But this became an issue, became a terrible issue. And to this day, depending on who you are, we don't know who's telling the truth. We don't know who's read the bill. We don't know the interpretation. Well, that's just like this bill. This bill doesn't say anything that's discriminatory. It only says that the Department of Training Safety down at Gypstick, that they will develop a program to be implemented into the driver training programs to help young adults. And it doesn't say black adults, it doesn't say white adults, it doesn't say Asian adults. It says for all of those who take a driver training course. So this should be a benefit to everybody across all racial lines, all genders. This is a good bill. I understand that this has created a certain amount of anxiety, but this is not the bill that anxiety should have been on. I would encourage everyone in here to vote in favor of this bill. There's two parts to it. One is that it tells the folks that are teaching driver education this is some other criteria that you need to teach these young adults that are taking these courses. The other deals with school safety, of slowing traffic down in school zones. That's what it does, ladies and gentlemen. And I would certainly encourage you to take a good look at this bill. And then if there's other fights to be done, pick the fights on a bill that it really matters to. And with that, I'll yield the will.
Chair recognizes Representative Momtahan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, today we've heard a lot of topics that have nothing to do with this bill. And that's the facts of the matter, folks. We've heard about voting. We've heard about topic after topic after topic. When I was in the committee, the discussion, they wanted to include, as the chairman said, all constitutional rights as part of a driver's education class. I think we were saying the tag words of this year were suppression and fraud. I think the phrase for this week may end up being, did you read the bill? Did you read the bill? All constitutional rights as part of a driver's education class? How does not allowing soldiers use of one home or birthright citizenship have anything to do with making sure that our partners in law enforcement and our citizens are on the same page when they interact? Realistically, what do any of these other topics matter in the context of a driver's education class? A class curriculum. What does it have to do with any of it? The answer to that question, as the chairman made in his remarks, is that these are political charades that have nothing to do with the fact that there are real issues, real ones, that our daughters and our sons, regardless of whether they are black or white, or whether they're Persian, like me. That's right. You know, we talk about these things. The person who stands in the well in front of you today is a person of color. My father went to Georgia State University. He got his PhD at Clark Atlanta University. And for over 20 years, he worked down the street at Grady Memorial Hospital, where he taught Morehouse students social work. Did you read the bill? The answer, I believe, is no. When I was in committee, I asked just simply, hey, what is the bill number that you've put forth with the underlying language that would expand civics education in the state of Georgia? And there was silence in the room. Hijacking bills just to politicize public safety has to stop. Read the bill. You know, we had many comments. We had one that said that this course would be taught by law enforcement. No, that's false. Again, did you read the bill? that this would create an additional driving course? No. Did you read the bill? This just recognizes the fact that we as a community have a responsibility to each other for our mutual safety when it comes to traffic stops and law enforcement interaction. At the end of the day, think about this. Don't oppose a bill that simply allows for educating citizens on how to interact with law enforcement during a traffic stop. Do it for your daughters who don't know that they need to pull into a well-lit area, so that the same events that happened on March 9th to those two women that were sexually assaulted don't happen again. That's all this bill does. And with that, I ask for your favorable consideration. Mr. Speaker, I yield the way.
Any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All those in favor of the passage of the bill will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. What purpose does Representative Jasmine Clark rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that this bill does not require law enforcement to teach civilians their constitutional rights, and all the attempts to add that specific language were voted down by Republican committee members?
I think the bill speaks for itself, and every member can read the bill. What purpose does Representative Prince rise?
Mr. Speaker, in accordance with House Rule 133, I ask to be exempt from this.
Gentleman has that right, and the journal will so reflect. What purpose does Representative McLeod rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that some of the Republican members of this House need to walk a mile in a black person's shoes?
What purpose does Representative Cannon rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that this bill does not mandate that there be African Americans or people of color on this actual council so that people can hear from the experiences of people who know how it feels to be discriminated against, to be racially profiled, and to be continuously assaulted by law enforcement? And that is a shame.
I'm sure the lady feels that to be true. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the passage of Senate Bill 115. The ayes are 98, the nays are 72. This bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Chair recognizes Representative Gunter for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House accept the Senate substitute to House Bill 409 as amended by the House.
Okay, the amendments that will be referenced on the agrees will be on the tables out back of the chamber, out back of the gallery, and out back of room 341. Representative Gunter has moved that this House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 409 as amended by the House. Clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 409 by Representative Gunter the 8th and others to be entitled an act to amend Article 4, Chapter 15 and Title 45 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to counsel for public officials and agencies so as to provide for a process for state-funded representation of certain judges in legal actions resulting from performance or non-performance of their official duties.
Chair recognizes Representative Gunter to explain the Senate substitute and the House amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, this was the bill that we passed for the Judicial Legal Defense Fund. This bill creates a commission that's appointed by the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice, the Governor, Lieutenant Governor, the Speaker, and the Council of Superior Court Judges. The amendment that the Senate made was that they put in language by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. This commission doesn't spend any money. All it does is make recommendation to the governor's office. The governor's office completely controls the expenditure of money to, if the recommendation is to represent a judge, that's all the expenditure is. And for that, I'm asking that we go back to the original version that came out of the House, and that's what this amendment will do. That was the only change that was made in the Senate. And I'd appreciate your favorable consideration.
Is there any objection to the adoption of the House amendment? It is AM 410547. Any objection? There is objection. Does the gentleman move? Yes. Gentleman moves. All those in favor of adopting the House amendment will vote aye. Those opposed to the adoption will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the adoption of the House amendment, the ayes are 132, the nays are 32, and this House has adopted the House amendment. On the gentleman's motion that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 409 as amended by the House, all those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the gentleman's motion. The ayes are 141, the nays are 28, and this House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 409 as amended by this House. Chair recognizes Representative Scoggins for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House agree to the Senate amendment to House Bill 488 as amended by the House.
Representative Scoggins has moved that the House agree to the Senate amendment to House Bill 488 as amended by this House. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 488 by Representative Scoggins, the 14th and others to be titled an act to amend Title 15 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to courts so as to provide for an increase in the minimum compensation for chief magistrates.
Chair recognizes Representative Scoggins to explain the Senate amendment and the House amendment.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this would restore the bill back to its original version. House Bill 488 is a bill that leveled the playing field with the magistrate judges and the other constitutional officers. This bill passed out of the House 154-7, and the amendment, we're just removing a unrelated issue to the magistrate judges.
Is there any objection to the adoption of the House amendment? Is there objection? Chair hears none, and the amendment has been adopted. On the gentleman's motion that the House agree to the Senate amendment to House Bill 488 as amended by this House, all those in favor will say aye or vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines. On the gentleman's motion, the ayes are 163, the nays are 2. And this House has agreed to the Senate amendment to House Bill 488 as amended by this House. Chair recognizes Representative Vance Smith for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that the House disagree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 449.
Representative Vance Smith has moved that the House disagree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 449. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 449 by Representative Smith of the 133rd and others to be titled an act to amend Chapter 9 of Title 25 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to blasting or excavating near facilities, so as revised the Georgia Utility Facility Protection Act.
Chair recognizes Representative Smith to explain the Senate substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We sent over a good clean bill. 16 organizations had gotten together for 6 months to discuss utility code upgrades. They were all in agreement when we sent that bill over. The Senate amended and put an item on that bill that we actually have in a study committee that Chairman Parsons has appointed. The 16 members agreed to study this issue, but yet they put it in the bill. So we're going to disagree and send it back over there to them, Mr. Speaker. If any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
No questions on the gentleman's motion that the House disagree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 449. Is there objection? There is objection. Does the gentleman move? Does the gentleman move? He moves. All those in favor of the motion to disagree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 449 will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the gentleman's motion. The ayes are 165, the nays are 2, and this House has disagreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 449. Chair recognizes Representative Cantrell for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House agree to the Senate sub for House Bill 43.
Representative Cantrell moves that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 43. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 43 by Representative Cantrell of the 22nd and others to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 4226, the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to form and content of applications for registration, heavy vehicle tax, and satisfactory proof of insurance.
Chair recognizes Representative Cantrell to explain the Senate substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, this is a bill that we passed out unanimously about 3 weeks ago, and as much as I hate to admit it, the Senate actually made a couple of very minor improvements to this bill. They actually expanded the definition of the driver of the vehicle so that it wouldn't just be the person applying for the license plate, but it'd be anyone who was expected to drive the car. If you remember, this bill allows a person at their option, if they're going to have some communication challenges, to put that information on their vehicle registration so that a law enforcement officer would be aware of that. In addition, it requires the applicant to sign an affidavit about the condition that they're claiming that an expected driver might have. And those are the only changes to the bill. It actually makes the bill quite a bit stronger, and I ask for your favorable consideration.
You have no questions.
I yield the will.
On the gentleman's motion that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 43, all those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. And the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the gentleman's motion. The ayes are 166, the nays are 1. This House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 43. What purpose does Representative Kirby rise? Need to hit your button.
To make a motion?
State your motion.
I move the rules of this House be temporarily suspended so a bill can be read for the first time and assigned to committee.
Clerk will read the caption.
Unnumbered House Bill by Representative Kirby, the 114th be titled Act to amend Chapter 6 of Title 47, the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to the Georgia Legislative Retirement System.
On the gentleman's motion that the rules of this House be temporarily suspended to allow a bill to be read for the first time and assigned to committee, is there objection? Chair hears none, and it is so ordered. Retirement. What purpose does Representative Ridley rise?
To make a motion.
State your motion.
I request that the bill be read for, rules suspended and the bill be read for the first time and assigned to committee.
Clerk will read the caption.
Unnumbered House Bill by Representative Ridley, the 6th to be titled Act to amend Title 36, the official code of Georgia Annotated relating to local government so as to prohibit certain restrictions on long-term rentals.
On the gentleman's motion that the rules of this House be temporarily suspended to allow a bill to be read for the first time and assigned to committee, is there objection? There is objection. Does the gentleman move? Gentleman moves. All those in favor of the... On the gentleman's motion that the rules of this House be temporarily suspended to allow a bill to be read for the first time and assigned to committee, all those in favor of the motion will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the gentleman's motion. The ayes are 151, the nays are 21, and the rules of the House have been temporarily suspended to allow a bill to be read for the first time and assigned to committee. It will be assigned to the Judiciary Committee. Chair recognizes Chairman Heath Clark for a motion.
I move that the House agree to the Senate substitute to HB 68.
Chairman Clark has moved that this House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 68. Clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 68 by Representative Clark of the 147th and others to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 43, 14, 15 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to certain military certifications that entitle persons to obtain certain professional licenses.
Chair recognizes Chairman Clark to explain his motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, colleagues. House Bill 68 went over to the Senate and came back as Senate Bill 45 with some amendments. And so what Senate Bill or House Bill 68 now does is it's very similar to what we did last year with military spouses and professional license reciprocity. This just establishes it for anybody that moves to our state and establishes residency within our state and they're a legal resident, that the boards will do a licensure by endorsement for them as well if they meet the provisions of being in good standing in the home state. They don't have any kind of, they're not under any kind of examination process. If all the requirements in that state are significantly similar, and if there's any portion of the state exam that requires, or the license that requires a specific state exam, they would have to take that portion of the exam as well. It does carve out dentists and make sure that the medical professions, which are not part of this bill, but it just has some language to reiterate that since they're part of interstate compacts. They did add another section to the bill. Back in 2018, the legislature, we passed some laws for the Georgia Nursing Board to collect some data to understand where the nurses are in the state. They added a provision for the relicensing to make sure that they get that data so that we can know where the workforce needs are, specifically for rural Georgia, to try to help make sure that there's enough nurses in rural Georgia to respond to pandemic situations. So that was a needed for workforce need. That's the bill, Mr. Speaker, and I will yield for any questions.
Chair recognizes Chairman Hawkins to your right for a question.
Does the gentleman yield?
I do, yes, sir.
Is it not true that this bill, House Bill 147, and Senate Bill 45, were not heard in subcommittee or committee in this House?
Well, they were heard in subcommittee. We didn't take a vote in subcommittee. During that subcommittee, you specifically had some concerns with dentists and gave me and stated in that subcommittee that you would support it if we could remove dentists, make sure that dentists were not part of the bill, and they're not part of the bill.
Does the gentleman yield again?
I will.
No, sir, I did not agree to that. I still have a problem with this bill. 45, Senate Bill 45 was not heard in committee. And on line 41, testing are substantially similar. I don't know anybody that can define substantially similar.
Well, we did that for military spouses last year. There hasn't been a problem with that. I think that you could look through the requirements of a state. I know specifically with you and some of your concerns with dentistry board, even though they're not part of that, that they have some provisions for in their state that you could get a license without passing a state exam. And in our state, you have to pass a state exam, so that would not be substantially similar, and the board would not recognize a state in those kind of situations in other professions because dentists were specifically carved out.
Does the gentleman yield again?
Yes, sir.
I just want to say that I'm still against this bill. I think it opens the door to people coming into this state from many other states that are not bringing jobs. They're bringing their own job. This is not a work-building job for Georgia. This is just a move job from other, a moving bill for other folks from other states coming in this state.
Well, we will just disagree, like we've had those conversations before, but we just disagree. There are 250,000 people who move to the state of Georgia annually, and about 25% of those families that move to the state of Georgia, one of the spouses have some kind of professional license. So in order for them to get to this state and get to work and be able to become providers in this in this state and not need handouts from the government, but be tax-paying citizens. I think it's very important that we help them be able to hit the ground running and get to work immediately. But, Mr. Speaker, I'll yield for any more questions. If there are not any, I'll ask for a
piling
fifth.
up here. I'll let you yield as long as you want to.
I'll yield for one more.
Chair recognizes Chairman Fleming to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the gentleman in the well, I'm trying to understand what your bill does, and I apologize for not speaking with you before you got there.
Sure.
Because I would have asked you about this. But as I understand it, we sent a bill over to the Senate that, as we have done before, which allowed certain military personnel that come to our state to have certain privileges that help them maybe cut down on the time to get a license to practice professionally somehow. Is that what we sent over there?
No, sir. That's what we did last year, and it passed, and it was signed into law for military spouses.
Well, then tell me, educate me, I'm sorry. What did we send to the Senate?
The same bill we passed earlier today, that was Senate Bill 27. 68 was the same exact bill as 27 that dealt with that 180 days, moving it to 2 years for using training and certification in the military to apply towards professional license once they start to transition out.
So then what we have back from the Senate is nothing like what we sent to them helping out military personnel. Is that correct?
That's correct, but it's still part of the same code section, same title.
So what we have now is not specifically helping the military, but anybody who moves from another state.
That's correct.
They can come into this state, and they no longer have to go through the same application process they did to apply and meet the standards in the state of Georgia?
They would no, sir. They would be given a licensure by endorsement if they meet the criteria that's laid out as far as they've established residency in this state, they're a legal resident of the United States, that they the exam that they've already obtained the license in the other state, as long as those requirements are substantially similar and they're in good standing, not under any kind of investigation in that home state. But if there is a portion of their exam to get the license in Georgia that is a state-specific exam dealing with the states and dealing with our laws, that they would have to take that part of the exam too. But these are people who have already obtained a license in another state that are substantially similar in scope and practice to get that license. They move to our state to allow them to get to work when they get here.
Would the gentleman feel more comfortable if a committee of this House debated this and looked into this before we passed a bill like this on the floor?
I would, we did have some meetings in committee, specifically with House Bill 147 that I was the sponsor for. We did have some debate in subcommittee there. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
With that, Mr. Speaker, I'll yield the will and ask for your favorable consideration.
On the gentleman's motion that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 68, all those in favor will vote aye. Those opposed will vote no. And the clerk will unlock the machines. What purpose does Representative Ridley rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, is it not true that this bill was signed to my subcommittee? We did not hear the bill, and actually some of the signers on the bill were going to vote against their own bill. Is that not true, sir?
I wish I had known that. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machines on the gentleman's motion. The ayes are 31, the nays are 129. This House has has disagreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 68. Disagreed. Okay. Chair recognizes Chairman Rich for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 94.
Chairman Rich has moved that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 94. The clerk will read the caption.
House Bill 94 by Representative Rich, the 97th and others to be entitled an act to amend Article 1 of Chapter 8 and Title 16 of the Official Code of Georgia, annotated relating to theft so as to provide for the crime of theft by possession of stolen mail.
Chair recognizes Chairman Rich to explain the Senate substitute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the mail theft and porch piracy bill.
Lady will suspend. We've got a little loud volume in here, so let's kind of tone it down a little bit. Lady may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I bring to you the Senate substitute to House Bill 94, which is the mail theft and porch piracy bill. The Senate Judiciary Committee made some amendments that are very good and I think address some of the concerns that some of the members of our body had. They added clarifying language that it will be within the discretion of the trial judge in order to charge a felony or a misdemeanor. And in addition, for the porch piracy, they added a requirement that there be 3 or more packages having been taken from 3 or more addresses, thus better ensuring that we are actually targeting true crime rings and porch pirates. I will yield for any questions.
You do have a couple of questions if you care to yield.
Yes, I will yield.
Chair recognizes Representative Walensky, in room 341 for a question.
Thank you, Speaker. Does the gentle lady yield?
I do.
What LC number has that last part you just said about the 3?
413169S, and it appears on lines 39 through 42.
Okay. I apologize. I got out of our folder LC 289958. Would that LC be?
No, I think that if you look back one more, there will be the
There it
substitute
is.
behind it.
Okay, tell me the line one more time, please. Sorry.
Lines 39 through 42.
Thank you so much, Chairman.
Do you further yield?
I do.
Chair recognizes Representative McLaurin in the gallery to your left for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the gentlelady yield?
Yes.
Appreciate your explanation of the changes. Is it not true that the porch piracy crime, which as you explained could be a felony or a misdemeanor, it still does not have any sort of provision that is sensitive to the value of the items? Is that correct?
No, absolutely not. There is actually no need for that. If that were in here, then there would be no change to the current law.
Okay, just wanted to make sure to confirm that. Okay, thanks so much.
Yes.
No further questions.
Thank you. I ask for your favorable consideration.
On the lady's motion that the House agree to the Senate substitute to House Bill 94, all those in favor will vote aye, those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machines. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine on the lady's motion. The ayes are 103, the nays are 59, and this House has agreed to the Senate substitute to House Bill 94. The House will be in recess until 3:50.